Exploring Bicycle Options for Federal Lands, Bike Sharing Rentals, and Employee Fleets. Today's presenters are Rebecca Gleason, who is a research engineer at the Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University, Susan Overson, who's a park planner and landscape architect with the National Park Service's Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, and Richard Menick, who is a geographer and GIS coordinator at Glacier National Park. And we'd like to thank our distinguished presenters for joining us today, and I'll hand over the presentation to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Amber. Good morning. I'm going to go over the agenda briefly that we'll be talking about today. We're going to start with the background of this project and talking about the benefits of bike programs, how they can benefit federal lands and others. And then we'll have 4 sections that we will review. And of the first 3, the first section is public bike sharing programs, and we'll talk about systems in Denver, Minneapolis, and Washington, D.C., and then we'll do a case study of Nice Ride in Minneapolis and how it integrates with the National Park Service there. And the second section, we'll talk about bike rental programs, and we'll discuss Grand Canyon and Yosemite case studies. The third sections, we'll review employee bike fleets and have a case study Richard will present on Glacier National Park Red Bike Program. And then finally, we'll discuss opportunities and resources to make federal lands and other places more bicycle friendly. So the background of this project, in 2008, I worked on a project called the Guide to Promoting Bicycling in Federal Lands, and I interviewed land managers from across the country, and lots of people were interested in bike sharing programs. And so once that guide was completed, we found funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Refuge Roads program, thank you very much, and embarked on this project to look at bike sharing programs and how they may be applied to federal land settings. And this document is available for download at these sites shown here. And now I'll talk about the benefits of bicycling programs and why federal land managers should consider them. High auto use on public lands has led to traffic congestion, poor air quality, damage to natural resources, and degraded visitor experience. Some benefits of bike programs are that they can help reduce transportation-related pollution and impacts on the environment. And they can also help with parking problems, as shown here in Grand Teton National Park. Example of a good bike parking facility. Another benefit to bike programs is that they can promote good health and increase physical activity. About 67% of U.S. adults are overweight or obese, facing increased risk for chronic disease such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And physical inactivity has led to serious health issues in our society. National parks and other public lands present a great opportunity to promote physical activity. And there was actually a report that was completed by National Park Service Advisory Board, and one of their key findings was that physical activity is a proven means to combat chronic disease and early mortality. In addition, they found that parks and trails provide opportunities for convenient and accessible venues for regular physical activity. National Park Service areas and programs provide an opportunity to assist Americans in improving their personal health and well-being. And biking is one of the recreational activities that promotes health. Other benefits of bike programs are that they can improve visitor and employee mobility. They provide options for seasonal employees who don't have access to automobiles, which is really common in the national parks, that people come from all over the world to work in our national park system. And they also provide options for children and other people who are unable to drive or choose not to drive. Bicycle programs can help disperse visitors away from heavily used areas. This is a photo of the new pathway in Grand Teton National Park. And they can provide better access to remote and sensitive areas, as shown. This site, the wood stork colony at Harris Neck National Wildlife Refuge, is only accessible by bicycle paths. You can't drive to this site. So biking trails and wildlife refuge can complement the refuge mission as a quiet way to observe and photograph birds and wildlife. And economic benefits. On the left here is a photo of a new bike shop near Sleeping Bear Heritage Trail in Glen Arbor, Michigan. And development of trail systems can spur economic development, such as this bike shop. Tourism dollars from mountain biking help to keep locals working in towns like Moab, Utah, Fruita, Colorado, Durango, Colorado, and Downeyville, California, which have become mountain biking destinations. Bicycle tourism has generated over $66 million annually in Maine, and there's other examples from other states. And then the study shown here on the right, this is the cover of a document that was completed recently, Bicycle Tourism as a Rural Economic Development Vehicle. This study examines the different kinds of self-contained bicycle tourists, their spending patterns, and the benefits to communities along the Trans-America Bicycle Trail. So these are just some examples of how bike programs can help stimulate economies. With that, I'm going to go into an overview of the three types of bicycle programs that we'll be discussing today. The first one is public bicycle sharing systems. The second is bicycle rental programs. And the third is employee bicycle fleets. And so that brings us to a poll question. What is your familiarity with automated public bike share systems? I'll give you a couple minutes to answer.
It looks like all of the responses are in, so I'm going to close the poll and show the results.
Great. It looks like we're split. Some folks are not very familiar, and some folks are very familiar with public bike sharing. So I'll move on and tell you a little bit about what bike sharing is. Public bike sharing is a form of public transportation. Bikes are used for short-term use at a network of automated parking stations. Bikes can be checked out from one place and returned to another, which allows for one-way trips. And as you can see in the photo here, the bikes have a uniform design. They all look the same, and this is an example in Minneapolis of the Nice Ride system. There are many different types of bike sharing programs. In this presentation, we will be discussing automated bike sharing systems that have been launched in United States cities. And bike rental programs, so these are a little bit different. This is what most of us in the U.S. are familiar with. They're aimed at recreational rides, a few hours to a few days rental time. They can offer various styles of bike, mountain bikes, road bikes, cruiser bikes. They can offer children's bikes and trailers, and currently they're the most common bike program in federal lands. And then the third program that we'll be discussing is employee bike fleets. And these are bikes for employees who are associated with an organization. They may be actual employees, volunteers, or students. They can use standard commercially available bikes as shown in the photo. They're low cost and simple to start, and they're already present in several federal lands, and we'll discuss that later. And so with that overview of the three types of bike programs, bike sharing, bike rentals, and employee bike fleets, I'm going to start with section 1. We'll be going into a little bit more detail on bike sharing. So I'll start with a brief history. Bike sharing's been around for a long time in Europe. There's 4 generations that people talk about for bike sharing. And this first one here is the first generation in the 1960s. Folks painted bikes white, just regular bikes, and put them all over the city of Amsterdam in the hopes that people would ride them around and and be able to use them as public transportation. And because the system was unregulated and the users were anonymous, there was a really high theft rate, and most of the bikes ended up in canals. The second generation here, 1995, Copenhagen, the capital city of Denmark, started a city bike program, and they had coin deposits and special stations around the city where people could put in pay a small fee and check out a bike. And this system had similar problems to the first generation, in that they had really high theft rates because the users were still anonymous, and it was a real small amount of money for checking a bike out. And things really changed in 2005 in France. The VELOV program was the first one that used information technology and had automated stations and credit card checkout. And in this one, the identity of the user was known. So this was a real turning point for bike sharing systems. And this system was very well used in Lyon, France. And it caught the attention of folks in Paris. And they launched a public bike sharing system with 7,000 bikes in 2007. And as of 2010, they had over 23,000 bikes in that system. And so in the United States, bike sharing has a little bit shorter history. These three examples shown here are automated, large-scale public bike sharing systems, and they were just launched in 2010. Nice Ride, Minnesota and Minneapolis, Denver B-Cycle in Denver, Colorado, and the Capital Bike Share System in Washington, D.C. And so they're pretty new in the U.S., and we're still learning about how they'll work here. And with that introduction of those systems, we're going to be focusing on one system in this presentation, which is the Nice Ride Minnesota system. So it launched in June 2010 with 700 bicycles at 65 stations. And this map shows the Mississippi River, kind of outlining it with my red dot here. And it shows the existing stations and proposed stations. Some key features of this system are the stations are closely spaced. They're within a few blocks of each other. So if you check out a bike from one station and it's only a few blocks to the next station, they have smart bikes that communicate with an administrative system. The program operators of Nice Ride redistribute the bikes among the stations. The stations are portable and modular, so here's a station right here. It can be lifted up and moved to another location if it's not working well in this spot. The bikes are durable and heavy. They're designed for short trips. They typically only have 3 gears. And they have no provisions yet for children or people with disabilities. So how the system works, you have to have a membership to start, and there's options for annual memberships, month-long memberships, or one-day membership if you're a tourist and just want to try it out. And members ride free for the first half hour of each trip with increasing fees for longer rentals. And so here's just an example of how this works. This first table here has the memberships, and here's the different options, and here's what you would pay in this column. And then once you have a membership, here are the fees for your time. So if you keep each trip to under half an hour, it's free. All you pay is your membership, and you don't pay additional fees. And then the fees increase exponentially, so they really encourage people to take short trips. And if you have a bike for a whole day, it'll cost you $65. And so here's another just kind of a comparison between bike sharing costs and a typical bike shop rental operation cost. So here's Nice Rides, their user fees for various times. And then this column here shows a typical bike rental fee. And so as you can see, these highlighted cells right here show that from about 2.5 to 3 hours, if you were to check out a Nice Ride bike, and keep the same bike for 2.5 to 3 hours, it would cost you about the same as renting a bike. I want to point out, though, that you can ride from station to station. So if I were to rent a Nice Ride bike and keep it for half an hour and go to another station, I can plug it into another station and I can immediately take a different bike and check it out and ride around. And as long as each trip with each bike remains under half an hour, then there are no trip fees. So you can just ride from station to station, which is what I did in Minneapolis this summer, and it was really quite fun. So the fee structure encourages short trips and high turnover to make bikes available to more people throughout a day, and it's expected that 7 to 8 people may use the same bike in one day. And the system's open for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, April through November in Minneapolis. So it's really convenient. People can use it at all different hours, which is different than bike rentals. The startup costs were $3 million for this system of 700 bikes and 65 stations, and that averages about $4,300 per bike for the entire system. So that includes the bikes, the stations, setting up the stations, the IT service, the redistribution vehicles. If you average that all out, it's about $4,300. So it's not that one of these Nice Ride bikes doesn't cost that much money. It's the whole system. And the operating costs are estimated at $1.5 million annually, and they're averaging about $180 per bike per month. There's lots of different partners that contributed to starting this system. $1.75 million came from the Federal Highway Administration's Non-Motorized Transportation Pilot Project. $1 million came from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention. And this is just something to point out. This ties into the health benefits of biking, and that health providers various health organizations are starting to really take an interest in bike programs as a public health intervention to get people more physically active. And finally, $250,000 from the City of Minneapolis Convention Center Fund. There's a number of ways that the system and the City of Minneapolis and St. Paul have worked to make sure that people are safe and that they are covered with regards to legal liability. And the first item is that Minneapolis became a bicycle-friendly community. The city earned a silver status bike-friendly from the League of American Bicyclists before they ever launched a bike share system. So they did a number of things to make sure there were safe places to ride around the city, and we'll talk more about that later. Secondly, there's a user agreement with a liability waiver that riders take responsibility for their actions. The third item to cover liability, the city isn't operating the bike share program. There's a third-party operator. And in the case of Minneapolis, or the Nice Ride system, it's a nonprofit organization. And that organization carries insurance, the appropriate insurance to cover riders. And with that, I'll wrap up the first part of the bike sharing and see if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. At this time, if any of the audience members or participants would like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A drop-down manager to type in your question. Or if you're joining us via the telephone and you'd like to ask your question directly of Rebecca, you can press *8 on your telephone keypad. It does look like we have a couple of questions, and so Rebecca, I'll moderate the first one to you. How does Nice Ride pay for operating costs?
Good question. Nice Ride's business plan estimates that 80% of the operating costs would be covered by the memberships and the user fees, and 20% would be covered by sponsorships. So with public bike sharing systems like this, they estimate that about 13 to 20 members per bike is what their goal is. So if there's 1,000 bikes in a system, they should have 13,000 to 20,000 members, and the fees from those members would cover most of the operating costs. And then different businesses and organizations can have their logo on the bikes themselves or the bike stations, and that sponsorship covers the other part of the operating costs.
Great. And the next question, what do they do with the bicycles in the station come November?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I believe that they put the bicycles in storage, and in Minneapolis, I'm not sure if the stations stay out over the winter. And our next presenter, Susan Overson, who lives in Minneapolis, may be able to answer that question better.
And that sounds like a great segue to introduce Susan. Susan, if you can unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Good. Thank you all for having me be part of today's webinar. My name is Susan Overson. I'm from the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And to give a little bit of history on our involvement with bike sharing is we really did not start out as a primary interest in developing a bike share system within our national park. Our primary interest back in 2009 was to develop an alternative transportation plan for the national park, and we received National Park Service Category 3 transportation funds to develop that plan, as well as the assistance of a transportation scholar and many of our multiple partners who participated in helping develop both the funding request for the plan, input on what that plan would look like, and are now participating in the plan's implementation. Some of the key partners were the Minnesota Department of Transportation, the National Park Service's Trails and Open Space Partnership, which is a group of over 50 agencies and organizations that are working together to develop trails, protect open space, and now addressing alternative transportation in the national park. There are also 25 local jurisdictions, 5 counties, and I had seen over 90 entities with some jurisdiction in the river corridor itself that have some authority or management of the river corridor. The National Park Service is the least involved from a management standpoint, and our role is more a coordinator and facilitator. The Metropolitan Council handles all the regional park and open space development, as well as transportation planning for the Twin Cities metro area, and their Metro Transit Division is involved with the bus and light rail systems. Bike Walk Twin Cities was the nonprofit agency that took on the Federal Highways Non-Motorized Pilot Project in Minneapolis. And upon hearing that they were addressing bike-friendly communities and helping to make communities more bicycle-friendly, as well as complete streets and other programs like that, the National Park Service started thinking a little bit more about how we could work together with Bike Walk Twin Cities and the Non-Motorized Transportation Pilot Project. And the Center for Transportation Studies here at the University of Minnesota was also a key player. So we had a lot of interest from the beginning, but our challenge was to identify what in particular we wanted to address for the national park in that alternative transportation plan. And our primary goals were to reduce congestion, both in the park, but obviously there are benefits to the Twin Cities metro area if everybody does that, to increase tourism to the river, develop interpretive programs using alternative transportation, increase non-motorized river access. There already is a well-developed regional park and trail system, as well as the National Millennium Trail, the Mississippi River Trail, of which 72 miles runs through this national park, but it is actually a 3,000-mile bicycle route system from the headwaters of the Mississippi River in northern Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. What we wanted to accomplish using existing transportation facilities is to create a seamless and recognizable multimodal system for the national park visitor. We wanted to minimize impacts to park resources, and the Mississippi River Trail could be the primary non-motorized transit facility in the park, since it exists and it serves the Twin Cities metro area. When we first started our planning, though, we identified over 300 existing and proposed connections to the Mississippi River, which was an overwhelming number. And we realized quickly that we really needed to focus our efforts on the important connections to the river corridor and where they intersect with transit. So in order to do that, we first looked at all of the transportation systems in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And as you can see, it's quite extensive. The Mississippi River Trail and the regional trail system is showing in yellow on this map on the right. When we focus on the river, it gets a little bit easier, but again, it's very complex because of all the different jurisdictions involved. But it gives you a sense of what we were trying to accomplish and how we were going to communicate this to the park visitor. We looked at a number of things, focusing on transit connections to the Mississippi River Trail. We looked at everything but bike share at this point. We also looked at all the bus and rail connections to the area. Again, not isolating anyone in particular, just getting a sense for what exists out there. We looked at bus routes and stations, as well as when those bus routes were operating. Some of them operate more frequently during commuting hours in the work week and lighter on weekends, which is different from people that are there for recreational and tourism purposes. So that played a key factor in deciding perhaps the eventual approach that we came up with. And then there's also 3 long-distance rail corridors in the area. One is the North Star Rail Corridor, and that follows the river. You can see here the yellow line and the Mississippi River, that this really started to stand out as an ideal opportunity. But again, the challenge was if the North Star Rail Station was 2 miles from the river corridor, how do we get people to the river? And at the same time, we were doing our alternative transportation planning, which was completed in February of 2010. Nice Ride Minnesota was launched, and obviously their green bikes were getting more visible around the area, and we decided to have a discussion and look at them as an opportunity as one of the non-motorized options in the river corridor. Their means of selecting where to put their bike share stations is very specific. It deals with where the transit rides are, where the population densities are, where the commuting routes are. Obviously, as a national park, we're looking at where the destinations are for the visitor. So in our discussions, we started talking about that and realized that Nice Ride Minnesota could actually help tie all the transit systems together. By working with Nice Ride Minnesota and by using the existing transit facilities, we were able to secure $1.4 million in funding from the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks program, as well as some additional National Park Service Category 3 funds to install up to 32 Nice Ride stations along the Mississippi River that will have our NPS Arrowhead on it. It will include our Ranger on Call program. Where appropriate, there will be interpretive messages, and they are going to be tied in with not only the Nice Ride stations, but the access to the river itself via other modes of transit. So there was a real opportunity here, and things really started to gel that we could create within the Nice Ride system our own bike sharing system utilizing the Nice Ride program without having to create a new system for ourselves. And that was a win-win situation both for Nice Ride and for the National Park Service. And you can see here in these slides all of the NPS arrowheads. These were the locations where we negotiated with Nice Ride, the ones that we were willing to pay for. And you can't see the smaller bicycle symbols right here, but these are the others scattered throughout the Minneapolis and St. Paul metro area that certainly could connect people to the downtown area. Our headquarters are right here, and our visitor center is right here. And obviously there's all regional parks and destinations here as well as in the Minneapolis area. So this started a nice relationship with Nice Ride Minnesota, an opportunity to use an existing bike share system to bring all the different transit facilities together, and also to help create a wayfinding system for visitors, since we will have our NPS arrowhead on every station that we fund. The key thing that Nice Ride is going to do for the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, in addition to encouraging people to get to the river without a car, is it's going to help connect them to destinations in the Mineral Corridor. On your left screen here, you can see this is the Mill City Museum, which was created out of a ruin. This burned down in 1992 and was left standing for many years, and now is a museum that houses the Pillsbury flour milling facilities that was established here in Minneapolis. And it's also on the National Register of Historic Places. But a big opportunity within the river corridor, obviously, is that we are a river corridor and people recreate on the river by connecting the Nice Ride stations to the boat access as well as transit. We're hoping to establish bicycle paddling routes that people can take where they put their boat in at one Nice Ride location, they take out at another, and they're able to do their shuttle either back to their vehicle or whatever mode of transportation they took. If there were a canoe storage facility located, they could do this completely by transit and without a car. So that's a very exciting opportunity. The existing programs with our Bike with a Ranger and Urban Wilderness Canoe Adventure program will benefit as well. We currently have one of our rangers, who you saw earlier in the pictures, that has developed a Take Me to the River program, and what she is doing is taking the people that go on our Bike with a Ranger programs and there's 10,000 kids that participate in the Urban Wilderness Canoe Adventure program, and giving them the opportunity to learn how to get back to the river without a car, especially kids that are not driving yet. They want to get back to the river, but they don't know what bus routes are served in their community or how to get there from school. So this program really emerged out of our efforts to work with Nice Ride and create the alternative transportation system for the park. And of course, you know, goals for both the park and for the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks program is to improve park resources. So we certainly feel that by reducing vehicles on the road that we will help improve air quality, by taking cars off the road, by encouraging transit to large events like this Mississippi River Challenge, where 600 people show up to canoe over a 2 to 3 day period. The 72-mile river corridor, there will certainly be new opportunities for them to do stretches where they could paddle and bike one way back or take transit. And I do believe that there are now some outfitters that are developing similar tours as well. So those are really taking off quite well, and the system isn't even in place yet. So it's good to know we're making that kind of impact. I think there are a number of reasons that bike sharing works well in the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area and would work well in other similar areas. We are a linear urban park. We follow the river. The majority of our 53,000 acres is water with a buffer on either side. There is a large urban population in the Twin Cities that is at about 3.3 million right now, projected to be 4 million by 2030. So congestion has become a big problem. The infrastructure is already in place, and this is something I think took a while to convince people that non-traditional parks like ours were eligible for the Paul F. Sarbanes Transit and Parks program, because that program was geared at the more traditional national parks like Glacier and Yosemite that own and manage their land and facilities. We do not. So we will work with the existing infrastructure, we'll fill in the gaps that we identify, we'll add signage, and we can improve boat access, all without having to maintain or operate those facilities, which is a plus for areas like this. The Nice Ride system is already in place. People recognize the green bikes, and now they'll recognize the Park Service's relationship with those green bikes. And I believe we're well positioned to be one of the first bicycle-friendly national parks, being that we're in the Twin Cities area. They were recently voted as the top bicycle commuting city in the country, following right behind Portland and now exceeding them. Although if there's anybody on here from Portland, I know it's very close, and that'll go back and forth as both of those cities continue to build out their systems. The best part about what we're doing, I think, is that we are providing visitors with multimodal options for bicycling, paddling, and transit. You will be able to fly into Minneapolis, pick up the light rail at the airport, take it to one of our destinations or a Nice Ride Minnesota station, and be able to visit the park without having to rent or use a car. And for us, there, again, like I mentioned earlier, will be no installation or maintenance costs. Nice Ride handles all of that. They cover the liability. They cover the equipment maintenance, and if there's any problems, they do the troubleshooting as well. So this really, in addition to tying it all together for us, will achieve the goals identified for the park in our alternative transportation plan. It's helping to maximize the National Park Service funds that are being invested in infrastructure by leveraging other state and private funds like the Blue Cross Blue Shield and the state of Minnesota, as well as the Twin Cities Bike Walk program. It's created new programs like Take Me to the River and Ranger on Call. It is protecting park resources. It will be reducing congestion. It will be creating a tremendous amount of awareness for the National Park, the Mississippi River Trail, and the National Park Service. You know, for the last 20 years, a lot of people didn't even know that they were in a national park, and now with our arrowheads on these Nice Ride stations, I think that will change that perspective. And the new partnerships that are coming together because of the alternative transportation planning are certainly growing by the day, and that's been a really nice benefit to see, because we are a partnership park and we do everything by partnerships. There's very little that we do alone. There are challenges, of course. Not owning or managing your land means you don't have any control. You have to work with your partners and negotiate, and in certain circumstances, for example, with the Nice Ride stations, we ran into, a location that we have chosen that might not have worked because of the property ownership, or perhaps there were historic preservation issues that the Nice Ride stations were not consistent with, but all those seem to be workable and have not created obstacles to installing them. They just have to be worked through. We are focusing on Minneapolis and St. Paul right now, but we would like to build out the 72-mile corridor with all forms of transit, and that will take time. Dealing with multiple partners and multiple funding cycles and multiple jurisdictions is always a challenge, but our Trails and Open Space Partnership helps bring people together for that. Funding is always uncertain. The transportation bill has yet to be signed, and we don't yet know what opportunities will be available, but we're certainly keeping our fingers crossed and understand that there's other funding sources out there that could help expand the program. And we do have a need, I think, that nobody else is going to take on, but is a good role for the National Park Service, and that is developing boat storage and shuttle services for multimodal recreation, and we are working on that. That is included in a the 5-year transportation plan that we have established for the park. So we look forward to our June 2012 launch of the St. Paul Nice Ride stations. We're very excited about that. We expect mayors and the governor and congressionals to be there for that launch. The bikes have been ordered. There will be another round of bikes ordered for next year. So we are well on our way. And it should be a very exciting launch, but most importantly is the feeling that bike sharing was the main thing that tied it all together for our area. So with that, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present, and I will take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Susan. If you do have a question, if you use the Q&A drop-down manager to type in your question, or if you're joining us via the telephone, you can press *8 on your telephone keypad and ask Susan your question directly. Susan, it does look like we have a couple questions, and the first one was, what year were the Sarbanes funds awarded to Mississippi?
The year the Sarbanes funds were awarded were 2011, just recently. The NPS Category 3 funds were awarded in 2009.
Great. And the last question, what method do you recommend to find funding sources for bike sharing programs?
That's a really good question. For one thing, I say persistence. This is something that I've been working on since 1996, and I would hope it wouldn't take people that long to put all the pieces together, but there are a lot of funding sources out there. Paul S. Sarbanes is one, and NPS Category 3 for the National Park Service. But we are putting together a list and exploring other options so that we could be creative, because it will take multiple funding sources. And some of the sources that we're looking at are Tiger grants, which a federal agency cannot accept, but by putting together a joint powers board or some entity, perhaps we could explore those opportunities. I believe Chicago has used CMAQ air quality funding to establish their bike share system. Depending on the category of funding under Paul S. Sarbanes, the transportation enhancement funding categories are the same for Paul S. Sarbanes as they are for transportation enhancements. So encouraging our partners to seek out funds themselves. The National Park Service can provide the 20% match. We've used Scenic Byways funds and many, many others. In Minnesota, there's a legislative commission on Minnesota resources, and many other local, state, and private funding sources. We're hoping the McKnight Foundation would be interested in something like this as well. And that is something that we will put together as part of our 5-year plan. But there is no magic bullet. It's digging through all the sources, seeing how your project worked for those funding sources, and then you don't get any funding unless you apply for funding. So I would just say go for all the opportunities that are out there, and once you get a program going, it creates a lot of awareness, and it seems a lot easier after the first award.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with this program. And we will continue with Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Susan. That was a great overview of Nice Ride and how the National Park Service has integrated bike sharing. So I'm going to move on and discuss bike rentals now. And I'm going to start with a poll question for those on the line.
It looks like we have all the responses, so I'm going to close the poll and show the results.
Great. Thanks, Amber. It looks like some folks have bike rental programs and some don't, and it's not applicable for others. So I'm going to talk about 2 different bike rental systems, and the first one is Bright Angel Bicycle Rentals in Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona, and the second is Yosemite National Park Bike Rentals in California. Before I dive into those, I'm going to really just give an overview of the differences between bike sharing and bike rental systems. So this first column here shows bike sharing, and then this column shows bike rentals. Bike sharing is for short-term use, and short-term use is encouraged by the pricing strategy for bike sharing. And longer-term use is typical for bike rentals. So for bike sharing, half-hour trips or less are encouraged so that one bike can be used by numerous people throughout a day, whereas bike rentals, usually maybe one or two people will use a bike throughout the course of the day. Bike sharing has a network of unattended stations allowing for one-way trips, where bike rentals are typically a single location, a bike shop that have staff that check out the bikes to you and you return them to that staff. Bike sharing targets bikes for public transportation, where bike rentals is more for recreational use. And on that note, I want to mention that travel on a bike on a public land from one recreation site to another is still considered transportation. Only about 30% of motorized travel is for commerce or commuting, and the rest is for discretionary travel, including recreational driving and driving to recreation sites. So travel from a campsite to a trailhead or to a visitor center or a gift shop on a bike is still transportation and could be on a rental bike. A few more differences. Bike sharing is subsidized by sponsors similar to public transportation. Thus, it's usually a lower cost to the end user, where bike rentals are a traditional for-profit business model and the rider pays more. Technology is used to track bike location and use, and traditional bikes are usually low-tech. And here's a key difference. Currently, the bike sharing systems we're talking about, the automated systems, don't accommodate children or people with disabilities, whereas bike rental systems are much more flexible in that they can offer kids' bikes, trailers, adult tricycles, and lots of different options that may be more attractive for a lot of federal land settings. Before I start the Grand Canyon bike rental case study, there's 10 questions that I'd like people to keep in mind as they think about whether bike sharing or bike rentals would be a good match for your specific area. And these are also located in, if they're not right now, they will be in this handout menu, so you can print these out and see them as well. Number one, are there places most people would feel comfortable biking? Number two, is the land unit in an urban area that has a bike sharing program or is planning one, similar to what Susan Overson just talked about in Minneapolis? Three, is the land unit located in a rural setting that is high visitation, is bicycle friendly, and has many destinations in close proximity? Then it may be a candidate for bike sharing. Four, is there a leader within the agency who's a champion for a public bike sharing system? Five, is there commitment from stakeholders and political leaders to support and fund a bike sharing program over time? It's a big commitment, as we learned from the Minneapolis case study. Six, what benefits will a bike sharing program provide for this area? It'll be different for each unique location. Seven, is this area accessible by other public transportation systems like bus or train? Eight, what are the visitor demographics? What is their interest in riding shared bicycles? Nine, is there a bicycle rental operation in or near the land unit? And 10, are there opportunities to adapt bike rentals to include multiple locations, to lower cost to customers, or otherwise make bikes more convenient to more visitors? So those are some key items to think about as we move forward talking about bike rentals. So the Grand Canyon gets about 4.4 million visitors a year. It's pretty high. They have congestion and parking issues there. Bike rentals were envisioned in the 1995 General Management Plan and included in the 2008 South Rim Transportation Plan. And National Park Service goals for bike rentals in the Grand Canyon are to provide visitor access to park sites without needing a personal vehicle and to improve visitor experience. So this is a high visitation park in a rural setting. They established their first bike rental program in the park in May 2010, so it's pretty new. They have 85 bikes that consist of cruisers and 7-speed bikes with lots of different sizes and options for kids. They're in one single location at the South Rim Visitor Center, and here's the hours that they're open, standard hours. And I just want to point out that it was a long time between when bikes were envisioned in 1995 to actually establishing a bike rental system in 2010. And during that time, Grand Canyon and partners worked to establish a greenway system and make the park have more places that are bike friendly and people felt comfortable riding. The Grand Canyon's The Bright Angel system is a private for-profit operator. They work within the National Park Service's commercial use authorization for bike rentals, and this information is included in the appendix to the bike sharing document, which can be found there's a link to it in the attached PDFs. The capital and startup costs are significantly lower than bike sharing, or the $60,000 for 85 bikes, which included the shuttle van, the helmets, and all the associated gear. And that averages out to $706 per bike. The annual operating costs were $140,000 in 2010, and it's interesting to note that that average is pretty similar to the operating costs for the Nice Ride public bike sharing system. And here's just an example of the end cost to users. A family of 4, if they do a half-day ride with 2 adults and 2 kids who have trailers, or 2 kids' bikes, it would cost $80 for the family. And if they did a full-day ride, it would cost $120. And so I just wanted to point out that this is advertised as the lowest cost activity in the Grand Canyon, but it's still a lot of money for many families. They handle safety and legal liability issues really similar to how public bike share programs are handling them. First, they make sure that there are bike-friendly places to ride. Second, they have a third-party operator. The Park Service doesn't run the system, and this helps limit agencies' liability. And have a leader that would take out a bike, and the bike share, the bike rental operator carries the appropriate insurance. So I just wanted to point out some fun things about the Grand Canyon operation. They provide a lot of information for visitors so that they can choose a ride that they will enjoy. So over here is a little handout they have on the orange bike ride, and this bike ride is appropriate for families with young children, riders who don't have a lot of time, who aren't comfortable riding in traffic. And in the map below, you can see where the orange ride goes. Here's where the bike shop is. And then they have other examples, like the blue ride goes here, and it's for more advanced riders. So providing that information is a good practice that can enhance visitor experience. And they also have a multimodal. They combine shuttle and bike rides. So if you don't like riding up a hill, you can take the shuttle up and ride your bike down, which I think would be attractive to a lot of folks. So in summary, Grand Canyon was a new service. The bikes were a new service in 2010, and they've been really well received by National Park Service managers and visitors as well. And I want to point out that bike rentals are a great way to introduce biking into a park and a biking culture into a park. This system has 85 bikes, which is pretty small in comparison to public bike sharing systems that have 1,000 or more bikes. And it's just interesting to think about the Grand Canyon has 4.4 million visitors and what kind of impact 85 bikes would have on transportation issues. So with that, I'm going to move on to a poll question. What is your interest in having a bike rental or a sharing program in or near your land area? I'll give you a few minutes to fill that out. Great, and looks like there's some interest. So I'll do another real quick case study on Yosemite National Park. They are also a rural park that has extremely high visitation, 3.5 million people per year. They're located in East Central California, and they have bike-friendly facilities, 12 miles of paved bike path that's relatively flat. And they have 2 different locations that rent bikes in the park, and they've been around for a long time, since 1993. They offer a little over 200 bikes and have lots of options for different people. They have tandem bikes, children's bikes, hand cycles, and 25 trailers that you can pull kids behind you. And here's just their standard rates that they charge. They're also a private for-profit operator, and Delaware North Companies is a large concessionaire in the park, and their bike rental service is just a small part of a much larger concessions contract. So it's a little different setup in the Grand Canyon, where bike rental was the only part of the contract. They handle safety and legal liability in the same kinds of ways. They have bike-friendly places to ride. They have a third-party operator. And it's a long-established bike rental service in Yosemite that allows a wide variety of people to ride. So it's a really good service. And here's a map just showing the paved pathway in Yosemite Valley. So having reviewed one bike sharing service in Minneapolis and a couple of bike rental services on federal lands, I want to consider bike rentals in federal lands that have bike-friendly places to ride, that are in rural settings, longer distances between attractions, places with dirt trails or hilly terrains where the public bike sharing systems the heavy bikes with only 3 gears may not be real comfortable to ride in these settings. And the characteristics of places that support automated bike sharing systems like Nice Ride are that they're bike friendly. Oops, I need to change my numbers here. They have high population densities. They're typically in urban areas where there's a lot of people that are available to use the bikes and sign up for memberships, but they could be tried in rural areas that have high visitations, perhaps places like the Grand Canyon and Yosemite, where a lot of people come to visit in a short period of time. Could be really good pilot studies for public bike sharing systems. They must have short distances between destinations, and connections to public transit systems are really important for the bike sharing systems. So because a lot of federal lands are rural and may not have all of those characteristics that support public bike sharing systems, we looked at some ideas to combine bike sharing and rental concepts. So how can bike rental operators make bikes more attractive to more people? And this first one, exploring partnerships with friends groups, gateway communities, public health organizations to sponsor bike rentals, has the potential to reduce the rider costs so that bike rentals are more affordable to more people, and they don't cost a lot of money. You can subsidize them. So that's one idea, that you could take existing bike rentals on public lands or near public lands and make them more accessible to more people. Another way is to establish multiple rental locations to make it more convenient for customers to take one-way trips. A third idea is to create a strong brand and logo for rental bikes, similar to the Nice Ride system in Minneapolis. If national parks and other public lands have logos and all the bikes look the same, rental bikes, they can help make visitors feel that they are taking part in something larger that relates to an agency's mission and the greater good, and can encourage biking to connect children to nature, improve public health, conserve fuel, have fun. And fourth, using online and social marketing techniques to increase public awareness and interest in bike use. And this is something that's very popular with the public bike sharing systems that could be considered for rentals. And a few more ideas to adapt public bike sharing systems more towards federal lands are to provide for children and people with disabilities, provide lighter weight bikes with more gears, have pricing structures for longer rides, and sharing equipment. This photo here shows a bus that's used in Glacier National Park during their peak visitation time in the summer, and then it's brought down to Bozeman, Montana, and Big Sky, where it's used at the ski resort in the winter. So sharing equipment could be an idea where bikes are used in cold areas during the warm months and then move down to warmer areas in the winter. And with that, I'd like to wrap up the bike rental section and open it to questions.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So if you'd like, you can type in your question using the Q&A drop-down manager, or you can use your telephone to press star 8 and address your question directly to Rebecca. It does look like we have a couple questions so far. So the first is, how many spaces do bicycles are there available on the Grand Canyon National Park shuttles or the buses? And I think that has to do with a lot of multimodal transportation. So, for example, renting a bike, then using the shuttle, and how many spaces are actually available on a shuttle?
Right, that's a good question. The National Park Service has their own shuttle, and I believe that it has a bike rack on the front that has space for 2 or 3 bikes. I'd have to double check that. But the bike rental, the Bright Angels bike shop has their own shuttle where they have room for numerous bikes. I believe it's a trailer that pulls behind their van. So you can get a free shuttle from the National Park Service that has some limited space, or you can pay for the private shuttle, which has unlimited space.
Great. And the last question, given the bike sharing system or sharing program in the United States, in urban settings, do any programs exist for smaller communities or more rural settings?
That's a good question. That's really relevant to federal lands, and they're not really. The automated bike sharing systems are really set up for urban areas, but there's lots of variations of bike sharing systems, or I guess bike sharing concepts. There's non-automated systems that can work well in smaller cities where you have, some type of variation of a rental system like we just talked about could work well, and it would be interesting to explore more of these ideas in rural federal land settings. And the system will really depend on the setting and what their needs are and what their goals are.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's it for the questions, and I think we can continue.
All right, great, thank you. So our final section is employee bike fleets, and I just want to point out that there's a number of them that already exist in federal lands. These systems are set up for employees. They're usually pretty low-tech systems with regular bikes, and they're usually pretty small and simple to start. Glacier National Park has a system. The Midwest region in Omaha, Nebraska has a office building that has a 10-bike employee system. Yosemite National Park has an employee bike system that just started this last summer for temporary employees in the park. And the National Capital Region in Washington, D.C. started a smart bike system in 2009, and it's a very small system for employees that's not been super successful, but we're going to learn more about a successful system, which is Glacier National Park, and Richard is going to tell us about that. Before he starts, I'm going to go over some key questions that folks should think about who want to start employee bike fleets. Is there support from leaders in the organization and staff for shared bicycles? Why do employees need bicycles? What will be the likely trip purpose with bikes given the travel needs of the employees? Who will use the bikes? Where will users ride? How will liability and risk be managed? Who will be responsible for managing and maintaining the bikes? How will the organization benefit directly and indirectly from a bike fleet? what are the funding sources for bikes and bike maintenance, and the program details like the number of bikes, the type of bikes, and bike storage. And these are all things to keep in mind as you think about a employee bike fleet and how it could work in your specific area. And I'd like to introduce Richard, who will talk about the Red Bike program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Rebecca. My name again is Richard Mennick, and I'm the geographer at Glacier National Park. Just a little background on Glacier for those of you who are not familiar with the park. Glacier is one of those national parks that could be considered a more traditional park. It's in a very rural, mountainous setting in northwest Montana in the northern Rocky Mountains. Fairly remote location. It abuts the Canadian border to the north, and the park, because of its mountainous location, has a very short visitor season. I'd say the peak season is really only 2 months long. We receive, on average, 2 million visitors a year, and 80% of those people come during the months of July and August. So fairly concentrated use. We have 130 year-round employees, about 450 seasonal employees who are employed from May 1st till September 1st, thereabouts. And in addition, over 100 volunteers now doing things like running campgrounds and assisting visitors at high concentrations of visitor use areas and things like that. So quite a large seasonal staff. A good chunk of the staff are concentrated in 2 large employee centers in West Glacier and in St. Mary's. So with that background, in 2003, we had a transportation scholar on our staff who wrote a proposal to support climate-friendly parks initiative, and that proposal was funded through the Glacier National Park Fund for the amount of $9,000, and this is really how our program began. That initial seed money allowed us to purchase 20 Worksman bicycles and 1 industrial tricycle with helmets and accessories and bike racks to begin the program. So the purpose of our program was to really provide an emission-free transportation option to employees and volunteers. As well, we were very interested in eliminating cold starts for numerous short vehicle trips that are required in these 2 employee areas, and to reduce fuel use at the same time. So the program that we're running that we feel pretty good about, its history, it's now coming into its 10th year just about. You know, this centers in the months May through October when most of our employees are on staff. So the primary use of the bikes, again, are for employees and volunteers to generally take short trips in these 2 concentrated use areas. Between office buildings, we have a campus in West Glacier where you can travel over half a mile one way between office buildings, so the bikes are used for those type of commutes. Campground staff who are based in the headquarters area can ride one of the red bikes over 2 miles to one of the campgrounds that they service on a bike path and go do their work that way, which has been an outstanding use of the bicycles. And then we also make the bikes available for light recreation after work hours, and with certain limits because of the nature of the bike, and also our interest in having the bikes not get abused by inappropriate use. The picture of the gentleman on the right side there is our trike, our cargo trike, which is used explicitly for mail delivery in the West Glacier area. And that's a pretty neat deal. That's a 6-cylinder van, typically in the summer, that is making a lot of stops and a lot of starts, and feel real good about the economy offered and the bike option for that mail delivery person, and they really enjoy riding the bike in the summer. Our program has a non-paid position. I am currently that person. It's a collateral duty, and I'm the coordinator of the program. And this is really an important job. The coordinator has to, gather feedback from folks on the program, address issues, get the bikes out in the spring, which I'll be doing the next 2 to 3 weeks, round the bikes up in the fall after the season of use. try to recruit a cadre of volunteers to perform some of the maintenance and other duties that come up during the course of the summer season, and also to coordinate more complicated repairs by bike shops, which we cannot handle up at the park. So towards that end, the superintendent has allocated a $500 annual fund for those type of repairs that makes the program somewhat sustainable for basic repairs that we might need to be doing. In terms of safety and liability issues, we do have a policy with helmets. We encourage helmets, and we have one helmet for every bike that is in place. In terms of Glacier being really a bike-friendly park, I would say with an asterisk, certainly within these two compounds of employees, extremely bike-friendly, and out of West Glacier, a very nice 2-mile bike path to the town site of Apgar. Beyond that, during the peak months of July and August, in fact, our primary road, the Going to the Sun Road, does not allow bicycle use between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. So I would say that this is not really truly a bike-friendly area, a bike-friendly park, but it provides bike-friendly options. So in terms of users of the bike system that we have, however, the user agreement that they sign allows the user to read an acknowledgement of the risk of their use of the bikes, and we ask them to respect the condition of the equipment. And finally, there is a liability waiver that they would sign that addresses specifically recreational use of these bikes. It's my understanding that when the employees and volunteers are using bikes for work-related duties, that they would be covered just as you are covered when you use a government vehicle. So we have these really cool bike license plates that identifies each bicycle uniquely by a name, and the names we've chosen are names of peaks or geographic features in the parks. These license plates mimic a fundraising effort by the Glacier National Park Fund for vehicle license plates that has been very successful, and kind of adds a nice touch to the program. Again, we encourage helmets. We distribute the bikes in May at the two work areas in West Glacier and St. Mary, and we have some standard office buildings where we stage the bikes and get them out and lock them. And so users that would like to access the bikes have to have gone to our supply center and to fill out the user agreement form to receive a key that would then allow them to unlock the bike and use the bike. So we round up the bikes in October, weather permitting. Sometimes we have a longer season, as we did last year. The bikes get quite a bit of use within these two compounds. I'd say we average, the numbers. We don't have firm numbers, but each bike is probably getting at least 2 up to maybe 4 or 5 rides a day during the working week. As far as the success in reducing vehicle use for short trips, we do have some preliminary numbers for that. We estimate annually that we eliminate over 200 cold starts and over 200 saved short drives of less than 1 mile as a result of people using the red bikes rather than a government vehicle. And for the mail delivery system alone, again, that mail delivery program uses a 6-cylinder vehicle. The red bike, or the red trike rather, that person uses accounts for 80 saved vehicle trips during the period May through September. So pretty significant savings, and something that the employees are really enjoying quite a bit, and we feel has been really successful. The coordinator position is pretty important as far as providing the hub for the questions that come in and to just keep things flowing. And the program really does rely heavily on a group of dedicated volunteers to move bikes around and help with routine maintenance. So with that, I think I'll say thank you for having me, and I'll pass the presentation back to Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Richard. I'm going to quickly go over a summary of employee bikes, and then we'll have a question and answer. So bike-friendly places to ride are important. They use bike program user agreements, and there's example agreements from a few different employee programs in the bike options document in Appendix F, and there's a link to that in the PDF handouts. And these programs are well liked by employees. They're a low-cost way to introduce bikes to federal lands. And with that, I'll open up to questions.
Great, thank you both. So if you have questions, if you can use the Q&A drop-down manager to type it in, or you can press *8 on your telephone if you're joining us via your telephone today. It looks like we have at least one question, and if the question is, where did you purchase the baskets attached to the picture of the tricycle?
That's a great question. I believe that we purchased those from the Worksman Company as we purchased the bicycle. Now the mail delivery trike, I think that basket might have been fabricated by our shop there at the park in Glacier.
Thank you. And the last question, what is the biggest challenge you face running the Red Bike program?
That's really an excellent question, and I'd say our experience has been, as we approach the 10-year anniversary, is really the maintenance of the bicycles beyond routine chores such as pumping tires and lubing chains. We're 30 miles from the nearest bike shop, and so when we have more serious repairs, either getting a bike mechanic up to the park, or to then transport, alternatively, the bike down to the bike shop in the valley, that's problematic. That takes time. That's an expense that we haven't factored in. So just maintenance of the fleet of bikes and keeping them running is a pretty big challenge. But we feel like we're holding our own so far.
Great, thank you. That looks like it's it for the questions. So Rebecca, if you'd like to continue.
Great, thank you, Richard. So the final section, I'm going to talk about bike-friendly resources, and there's a few highlighted here. Good practices to encourage bicycling and pedestrians on federal lands is a report that was prepared by the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit in the Parks Technical Assistance Program, and it contains a sample of instructive examples from a wide variety of federal land units, and I'm just going to talk about two examples from the report to give you a flavor for it. And then bicycle-friendly programs, the League of American Bicyclists, and then some other resources are listed as well. So the first example is a Grand Teton National Park Pathway Ambassadors program, and in 2008, the park completed an 8-mile pathway. It's a paved pathway that goes along the most heavily traveled corridor in the park. So it's really popular for bicyclists, and it's very well used. And the National Park Service has started a program of volunteer pathway ambassadors that help educate visitors and patrol the pathway. So the pathway is a new way to travel in the park, and there's a need for visitors to understand the rules and etiquette, like pet restrictions. The volunteers assist with bike repairs and medical needs, and they really help busy Park Service employees manage the pathway better by reporting serious tire tracks, footprints, or other resource degradations that are off the pathway, and report bear sightings and wildlife encounters to park dispatch. So it's a great program, and there's a position description in the document, in the Exploring Bicycle Options document, and other training materials that Grand Teton developed that could be used as templates for other land managers. So that's the first example I wanted to mention. And the second one relates to maintenance. Just south of Grand Teton National Park, there's a wildlife refuge, the National Elk Refuge, and the pathway is connecting through Grand Teton National Park, through the refuge, into the town of Jackson. So this is a common a common predicament that bikeways cross multiple jurisdictions, and it's not always clear who's going to be responsible for the operations and maintenance of the bikeway. So this is an example of a memorandum of understanding that was created between Teton County, Wyoming, and the National Elk Refuge for the pathway. And it clarifies responsibilities such as who will fund educational interpretive signage, who provides law enforcement assistance, who will maintain the pathway, like doing weed control, and it also identifies seasonal closure times for the pathway to minimize disturbances to elk and other wildlife. So this MOU can serve as an example for others, and it's also located in the appendix of the Good Practices document. We've been talking a lot about bike-friendly places, so I just wanted to ask, how familiar are you with the League of American Bicyclists bicycle-friendly designations? Great, it looks like some folks aren't familiar with it, and there's a range of answers. And so I'm going to quickly talk about the League program and let you know how it works. So businesses, communities, states, and universities can apply to earn a bicycle-friendly designation through the League of American Bicyclists, and they can earn bronze, silver, gold, or platinum levels. And really the application process is designed to help businesses, communities, universities, and others learn how they can become more bike-friendly. And I just want to mention that U.S. cities with the large-scale bike-sharing programs like Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Denver, all of them earned bike-friendly status by going through this process through the League of American Bicyclists prior to launching their public bike-sharing programs. So it's a great way to learn how you can become more bike-friendly. You can earn points in 5 categories, and they're engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. And over here on the right is just a screenshot of some of the questions that the application will ask, such as, is bike parking readily available throughout the community? And that's, or maybe throughout a federal land. That's engineering. It's physical infrastructure for bicyclists. And then under education, a typical question would be, does your community educate motorists and cyclists on their rights and responsibilities as road users? And encouragement is really important. Does your community have an up-to-date bicycle map? Do people know that there are places to ride, or where recommended places to ride are? So those are just some examples that I wanted to point out on the bike-friendly program. That's a really useful program, and I would encourage you to link to their website and take a look through their program. And there's been a lot of discussion about bike-friendly public lands. Should there be another designation? The university program started in 2010 as a new designation with the League of American Bicyclists, and it was created not by the League of American Bicyclists, but by a network of campus bike planners who created the questions for the application that were specific to universities, like transportation demand management questions, for example. And I just want to note that not every refuge, park, Bureau of Land Management unit, or forest will want to or should strive to be bike-friendly. Some of them have access restrictions for resource reasons that will override any actions to be bike-friendly. But for those who are interested, they may be well-suited to create questions that are more appropriate for public lands. So here's a poll question for you. What is your level of interest in helping to adapt bike-friendly communities' questions to be more relevant and specific to public land settings? I'll give you a couple minutes to respond. Great. Well, it looks like there is some interest, and for those who are interested in would like to be part of the conversation, they could email me after the presentation, and we have been in contact with Andy Clark with the League of American Bicyclists about this idea, and it's kind of evolving. So in conclusion, I'm just going to review what we talked about today. Section 1 was public bike sharing programs, and there's 3 main ones that have, large-scale ones that have started in the U.S. in 2010 in Washington, D.C., in Minneapolis, and in Denver. And the Minneapolis system is integrating with the National Park Service to create a truly multimodal transportation network so people can come to the city and travel around without needing to rent a car. In Section 2, we talked about bike rental programs, and the Grand Canyon established its first ever program in the park in 2010 with 85 bikes, and it's been really well received. Yosemite's been going since 1993 and had a successful program, and bike rental programs are currently the most common way to provide bikes in federal lands and provide options for children and people with disabilities as well. And the third section, we talked about employee bike fleets, and Richard gave a great overview of the Glacier National Park Red Bike Program, which has been going for almost 10 years. And in general, these systems are low cost and simple to start and could be started most anywhere. Finally, we talked about resources, and all of these resources are listed in the attachments, which can be found by clicking this button up the upper right part of your screen. And I also want to mention the Paula Sarbanes Transit in the Park Technical Assistance Center, and there's their website, and you can contact the Technical Assistance Center for questions about any questions about bicycle, pedestrian, or alternatives to single occupancy motor vehicle transportation. And with that, I would like to wrap up the presentation, and thank you for your time and participation, and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Rebecca, and all the other 2 presenters as well. If you do have a question, you can use the Q&A drop-down manager to type it in, or you can press star 8 on your telephone keypad if you'd like to speak to them directly. And as folks are typing in their questions or pressing star 8, we do have a few that have already come in. And I believe this one's geared towards Richard. Have you had any employees that have commandeered a bike for their sole use? Has this happened? And if so, how do you deal with the issue?
Oh, that's a great question. To our knowledge, that has not yet happened. There are, given the size of the fleet, there are a couple of staff members that have such high need to use the bicycle that they're informally referred to as, the librarian's bike. But the rule of thumb remains: if the bike is parked and you have a key, then you are able to grab that bike and use it for your needs. So that is a good question.
And one more question for Richard. You had mentioned some of the logistical issues associated with having the bikes repaired and the distance that you are from bike repair shops. But is the amount allocated, the $500 annually, enough to actually fix the issues with the bikes, or do you find that as a shortfall?
It's, that another very, very good question. Thus far, it's been working. I think that we've been fortunate that people have not been abusing the bikes, but that potential certainly remains. Because of the lack of abuse, there's been pretty low maintenance needs of the bicycles. And in fact, we've been able to purchase additional bicycles just with some of the maintenance money that is carried over from year to year. I don't think I mentioned in my presentation, but we added 6 additional bicycles to our fleet in 2008.
Thank you, Richard. One more question for Rebecca. What happens if someone does not return one of the Nice Ride bikes?
That's a good question. They have a policy where they will be charged $1,000 on their credit card if a bike is not returned within 24 hours. But because the system is pretty new and people don't always understand how it works, they're pretty lenient on their fees and give people every opportunity to bring the bike back. So because to check out a bike, a credit card is required, they could charge $1,000 for any bike that hasn't been returned. But to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. So the system seems to be working well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. I think that's it for the questions. So I'll wrap up the presentation by thanking all of our participants and especially our presenters today. Rebecca, Susan, and Richard, we thank you for your time and expertise in sharing your experiences with us. For those of you who have not visited the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Technical Assistance website, the website address has been posted for you here, and there's also a help desk email address and a phone number. I'll remind you that all of the materials for today are available in the handout section of the live meeting, including the reports that were referenced, as well as a Word document which has a list of website links that will be helpful for you as you move into your endeavors of bike sharing or bike renting or employee programs. Thank you again to our presenters and our participants, and we hope to see you at our next Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Technical Assistance webinar. Thank you and have a great day.